Welcome, creative adventurers. I'm Debbie Cohn with Cone Designs. Thank you for stopping by today. I'm so glad you're here. In this week's video, I'll be showing you how to sew a square in a square, also known as economy block, but a slightly different variation. This is part of a series where I'm sewing the block of the month for 2022 for aquiltinglife.com. So I encourage you to go to aquiltinglife.com and to the YouTube channel of A Quilting Life by Sherri McConnell for all the details for this year-long sew-along. This is June 2022's block. It's right here. In this video, I'll show you two different ways to square up your units. That would be your half-square triangle, your flying geese, and your economy block. I'll give you tips and tricks along the way to make sewing this block quick and easy. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, tell a friend, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's the best way to support my channel. Also, you can go to my blog and website and shop at dconedesigns.com. You can find several free patterns, including to benefit the people of Ukraine. I also invite you to join my sew-along in progress called Summer Scrappy Sizzler. Behind me on my makeshift design wall, you can see I have the first 6 blocks of the block of the month for 2022 with aquiltinglife.com, January through June. This right here is the June block. Let me show you how it's put together. Take a look at the block. In the center of the block, you'll see the traditional square in a square, so square in a square, also called the economy block. Surrounding that, you have another square tilted on its side like the center block. So it's kind of a double square in a square. And then you have half square triangles in the corners. And then to frame it, you also have flying geese units here, 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 and here. So the block is composed of 3 separate sections. Your inner unit, which is the square in a square block, the 4 flying geese, and the 4 half square triangles. We'll take it one step at a time. Here are the pieces you'll need all laid out. Fabrics A through F. Fabrics A and C will be for your flying geese units. Fabrics E and F will be for your square in a square or economy block sections. And then D and B will be for your half square triangles. Here are the tools you'll need for this block. In addition to the regular things you'll need, your ruler, your scissors, and your rotary cutter, you'll want something to mark your half square triangles with. You could use a seam marker, diagonal seam tape, or you could just use a ruler and a pencil. You'll also need something to trim your half square triangles with. I recommend the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers. I love and use them every time I quilt. You could use a square ruler, or you could just use a long ruler and your mat and rotary cutter. It's up to you for whatever fits your budget and your preferences. I am an Amazon affiliate, and I do have links in the video description below of these tools. If you are interested in any of them, you would be able to purchase it, a small commission to me at no cost to you. So let's get started making the block. There are many ways to approach constructing this block. You could work from the top down, from the center out, or assembly line the different sections. I'm going to work from the center out. So I'm going to start with my economy block, my square in a square section in the center. I'll need the fabric E and then the 4 fabric F squares. The first step is to mark the back of the fabric F squares with a diagonal line. I'm going to use my seam marker only because it's a little bit smaller than my 18-inch ruler. You could use diagonal seam tape and not bother marking. It's up to you, whichever works best for you. I make sure that I allow for the width of the pencil though when I'm marking. I'm using the pencil, and here I'm marking kind of dark so you can see it. That. You'll mark the other 2, and then we will begin the stitch and flip technique. To begin sewing the square in the square with the stitch and flip technique, first we'll need to lay our squares right sides together, and you'll do them in diagonal corners like this. Make sure that you pay attention to the direction of the diagonal line on the back of your block. They both should be going the same direction. We're going to take it to the machine and stitch just to the inside here of this line, not on the line, but just barely to the inside, because we're going to want to accommodate the fold when we fold the square back like this, and then press and trim. The same on the other side. We're going to stitch just a thread's width to the inside like that along the line, and then when we fold it back, that accounts for the fold over on top, and we'll make sure that we have enough fabric that reaches all the way to the edges of the block. So let's go ahead and stitch. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and stitch just to the inside of the diagonal line for the stitch and flip technique in our square and a square or economy block. Let's go ahead. I flip it around and I stitch on the other side. Again, stitching just to the inside, which would be this way, to allow room for the fold over of the fabric. There we go. I suggest that before you cut it off, before you cut the excess off at 1/4 inch, you double check. So I gently finger press and I make sure that it goes all the way to the edge on both sides. And you can trim it if it's a little over, no, not a problem at all. Let's check the other side. Finger press gently, double check to make sure it's all the way on both sides. Yes, no problem. So I'll be able to cut it off. I'm going to trim, eyeball trim about 1/4 inch, and then I will take it to the iron and press it back. I've pressed the 2 corners back. I'm going to repeat the process on the other side, making sure that I have my diagonal lines going the correct direction, like this. One here, and then on the opposite corner. Right here, I'll repeat the process, stitching just to the inside of the line. Then I will finger press them both back, double check to make sure they meet the edges. Then I will trim and press. Finger press it back. I finger press it back to check. Yes, perfect. Finger press this one back gently because it is a bias seam. Check it again, no problem. Okay, I can trim. Let's take it to the pressing mat and press the rest of it open. Center the economy block. I'm going to press it gently to set the seam and then flip and press it back gently, and the other direction as well. Now I'm ready to square up my economy block, my square and a square block. To do that, I can either use a ruler and a rotary cutter, or I can use a square ruler like this. I'm going to use the square ruler, but first I'm going to show you how to use your regular ruler and a rotary cutter. What you would do is you take your block, and in my case it's 4.5 by 4.5 should be the correct size. I'm going to center it along the 4.5 by 4.5 marks. 1, 2, 3, 4.5, and then going down 1, 2, 3, 4.5. I can see this is dipped a little, so I'm going to scoot it up ever so slightly. I can see it's a little over here. I want to make sure it's equally over here. Scoot it this way just a hair. And make sure that it's at least 4.5 down here. That looks really good. So what I would do then is I would lay my ruler on the 4.5 inch mark on my mat, trim, lay it down on the line right there on the mat, trim there, rotate the block, do the same on the other 2 sides. Instead, I'm going to use my 4.5 inch square ruler. So what I'm going to do is ignore the mat altogether, and I'm going to line it up so that I center the block and make sure that I have everything I need. So over here you can see there's a little bit of a divot in here, so I want to make sure I line the ruler up right there so I get the most of the block. And then just scoot it up a little bit right there, and I check this side as well. It looks good, and then I trim. I trim 2 sides at a time. There's not a lot to trim. Make sure your rotary cutter blade is sharp, that you've changed it. That makes it trimming a lot faster. Rotate the block, line it up with the edge that I've already trimmed. Trim again. There's barely any, and my block is trimmed. There was barely any to trim, and now it's done. We're going to use the same stitch and flip technique for making our flying geese. So we'll want to mark the back of our squares, our C squares, using a diagonal line. You could also use diagonal seam tape and skip marking, but I'm going to do that. Again, I'm using my seam marker, but that's only because it's easier than the longer ruler. You'll mark all the backs of all of them. Then you're going to lay them on the corner of each one like this. Here is the Flying Geese unit. I'm ready to stitch it. You can see I've pinned the squares with their diagonals going this direction so they meet in the middle. I'm going to stitch and then finger press it back and then stitch the other one. When I stitch, I'm going to stitch just a hair's width, a thread's width to the inside, this way, so that I make sure I leave room for the fold over of the fabric and that it mates all the way to the edges of the block. Unfortunately, I made a mistake. Let me show you how to fix it. It happens all the time. It's no problem. So here's what I did. I laid both squares down and then stitched one down. That was a mistake. I should have waited, not put this one down at all until after this one was stitched and flipped back. So to fix the problem, I just have to remove the stitches from the edge to where the line is, just enough, maybe a couple threads more, to flip this out of the way. So I'm going to take Jack here, my handy dandy stitch ripper or seam ripper, whatever you call it. Gently pull it back, a couple more threads. There, I've removed enough stitches that I can pull this back out of the way and finish restitching it. Then I'm going to flip it and check it and trim before I lay down the other square. So if you make the mistake, just fix it. It doesn't take much time at all. Now I'm going to gently finger press it back and double check. Yes, no problem. So now I can trim the 1/4 inch. Again, you can use a rotary cutter here, or you can just trim it like I am, eyeballing it. Now it's time to lay the other one down and stitch. So I've laid the other one down. I want to make sure this is flipped back, and I'm going to stitch again on the diagonal line, just a thread's width inside the line to account for the fold over of the fabric. I've removed my pin. I'm going to double check, finger press back. Yes, no problem, it beats. Now I can trim the other one. Trim to a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And now I'm going to go to my iron and press it back and then trim. Here's the Flying Geese unit. Let's go ahead and press it back gently. Now it's time to trim my Flying Geese unit. In my case, it's 2.5 by 4.5, but you'll want to consult your pattern for the size for your block. So what I'm going to do, I know it's 2.5, so I can use my ruler for this, making sure that it's even, and ever so slight trim right there along the one side, double checking on this side as well. Almost nothing. Now let's do the 4.5. So I lay it on my mat, count over 1, 2, 3, 4.5, and I see it's a little bit over, but not much. I want to make sure that I trim enough on both sides equally, so I split the difference, and it looks like that's going to work like right there. I take my ruler, line it up on the 4.5 and trim, and flip it around because I'm not that ambidextrous, and line it right on the 0 mark, so to speak. And then the 4.5 over here, and there's just a tiny bit to trim on this side. And my Flying Geese unit is trimmed. I'll just need to do the same thing for the other 3. Now we're going to make our half-square triangles, or HSTs. To do that, we're going to draw a diagonal line on the back of our B squares, or you could use diagonal seam tape. I'm going to show you drawing the line for consistency's sake. In this case, if you have the diagonal seam marker, what you can do is line up the center line with the point of the block, and then mark on both sides of the ruler. And sew on those lines. Your other option is to do it like this, where you mark the center line and sew a 1/4 inch away from the diagonal line. It's up to you which way you're more comfortable with. If my blocks are small, I'll skip this step and just use diagonal seam tape. Here are my half-square triangles. I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the line on both lines, then the same for the other half-square triangle set. Then I will cut them down the middle into 2 half-square triangles and press them back. I remove my pins and I'm going to trim down the middle to separate them into the 2 half-square triangles. You could use a rotary cutter if you'd like. That works just fine too. Here are our 4 half-square triangles. It's time to trim and press them. I'm going to press them gently. Then I'm going to flip them back so the seam goes to the dark side and press. A tip for you is to put the dark side of the fabric up so when you pull, the dark flips up and the seam stays so it goes to the dark side. Here's how you can trim your half-square triangles without any kind of a specialty ruler, just using your rotary cutter, regular ruler, and a mat. So I know in this case that my square needs to be 2.5 by 2.5. So what I do is I line up the square and I look to see at 2.5, is it over or not? So I scoot it this way. There's a little bit extra because I want a little extra on each side and split the difference. So I'm trimming from both sides equally. And trim. Turn it to the other side. Lining it up on the line this time. And I can use the mat or I can use my ruler because in this case this quilting ruler is 2.5 inches. I'm going to go faster and use the ruler itself to trim this side and the other 2 sides. However, you could use your mat for this as well. I'm splitting the difference in this case so that my block remains centered. There we go. Then we would need to trim the other ones if you're using this method. Now let me show you the clearly perfect slotted trimmer way to trim your half-square triangles. In this case, I'll be using trimmer A because it's the 1/2 inch markings that I need. So what I do is I line up my 2.5 inch dotted line on the ruler itself with my stitch line right there. Like that, I line it right up on it. Scoot it so that the point of the ruler matches the point of my block. And trim. And I only need to trim one side, 2 sides, and then the little dog ear slots. One there, and one there. Then I'll just need to press it back. I can finger press just to check. But there is my trimmed half-square triangle. It just needs a quick press. I'll do the same for the others. We've cut and sewn and pressed and trimmed our pieces. Now it's time to assemble the units into the entire block. So first I have my economy block, my square and a square block, that's our center. Then I'm going to add my flying geese. I notice that they go this way with the white toward the center, like this. And then all I need to do is fill in with my half-square triangles, making sure that I notice that the dark goes to the outside, the light, the white in this case, goes to the inside. All we need to do now is to sew it together. You can either do it in columns or you can do it in rows. For me, my brain works best by sewing it in rows, so that's what I'm going to do. Here I'm stitching the first row together, the first few pieces. I'm adding the other piece on the top row, making sure I have this going in the correct direction. Next, I'm going to sew the second row. I've got a pin to hold it in place. Now I'm going to attach the other flying geese, making sure I have it turned the correct direction. Right sides together, so with a 1/4 inch seam, I am going to do one pin. There's row 2. Now let's sew row 3. Again, making sure I have this going the correct direction. I do. It's looking great. I'm going to press the rows and then I'm going to sew the rows together to complete the inner block. One thing you'll want to keep in mind when pressing the rows is to press the seams in opposite directions. Row 1, I'm going to press to the left. Row 2 seams press to the right. Row 3 seams press to the left. That way, when I go to sew the rows together, I can nest the seams at this intersection and this one, and the block will lay flat. I'm going to flip the center around to make it easier because I'm right-handed. Flip it back. And then the last one, I'll press this row, the seams to the left. The next thing I'm going to do is pin, nest the seams, and pin. Nesting means you butt the seams up against one another. One's going one way, the other's going the other way. Then they'll lock into place when you pin them. You can push them together and feel them kind of snug into place. I'll do that at the intersections and sew the rows together. And I'll come back with the completed inner block. Here is the completed inner block. All I'll need to do now is to press it. When I press, I'm going to press the seams, these two long seams, I'm going to press them open and then touch up any other seams that I need to press so that the block will lay flat. Here is the completed inner block, all ready for the churn dash borders. In this video, I will not be showing you how to make or add those borders. Sherri McConnell of aquiltinglife.com shows you that in her first video for the January 2022 block of the month. And here it is, the completed June 2022 A Quilting Life block of the month. It's so cute. I'm really happy with it. Please join me again next month when I'll be making another A Quilting Life block of the month. Be sure to go to aquiltinglife.com and the YouTube channel A Quilting Life for all the information on her block of the month for 2022. Thank you for watching today's video. If you like it, please subscribe and tell a friend, and give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment. Tell me if you're sewing along on the A Quilting Life block of the month for 2022. I'd love to know. I'll see you next month with the next block in the series. Take care.